Diesel-powered cars aren't super common in North America, but over the years we've had our fair share of examples. When we think diesel, names like Powerstroke, Duramax, Cummins, and TDI come to mind. I wanted to go over 10 forgotten diesel-powered cars that have been offered as far back as the 1960s and up through 2020. If this is your first time watching, thanks for tuning in. You're listening to a real person. Believe it or not, I still get comments saying I'm AI. It actually makes me worried for some people, but I won't get into all of that. I'll be going in chronological order. I have timestamps in the description. And without further ado, here are some of the most forgotten diesel-powered cars to have been offered. In 1958, Studebaker decided they wanted to swap in a Mercedes 180 diesel engine into one of their fleet-oriented Scotsman cars. The Studebaker Packard Company distributed Mercedes and sold them under the same roof across the nation, so the idea wasn't far-fetched. 46 horsepower was quite low, but for city taxi use where speed is not much of a factor and economy is, it seemed like a great idea. As it turns out, the cost of the engine and anticipated modest sales kept it from being offered as an option. Fast forward a few years and a Perkins 4-cylinder diesel was adapted to the Lark, and it's estimated that around 20 or so were actually built. Now, Studebaker has had offered diesel engines in some of their small and big trucks, but to see the Lark, this compact little car, was a surprise. The experiment did not amount to much, but it happened, it's quite unusual, and most people don't know about them. Next up is one of the rarest diesel-powered cars ever built in America, and I mean really rare. The 1980 AMC Eagle turbo diesel with sources estimating around 7 total units built. In the late 70s, AMC was desperate to stay relevant. Gas prices were high, diesel cars were trending, and the new Eagle, their lifted four-wheel drive wagon, was their best shot at standing out. Somewhere along the line, AMC decided the Eagle needed a diesel option, but instead of developing one in-house, they outsourced the job to a small California outfit called American Turbo Diesel. The conversion swapped the standard 4.2 inline-six legendary motor for an Italian-built 3.6 turbo diesel inline-six that made about 150 horsepower. That was technically more power than the gas engine, but the diesel setup added over 400 pounds to the car's weight. So, despite the extra power, it was much faster, just a bit more torque and slightly better fuel economy. They got around 20 miles per gallon combined compared to 16 miles per gallon for the gas model. It was an impressive piece of engineering for what was basically a low-volume experiment, but it came at a price. The diesel Eagle cost nearly double what a regular one did, making it a tough sell when AMC dealers were already struggling to move inventory. Add in the fact that nobody in America knew how to service an Italian diesel, and it's easy to see why only 7 were ever completed. The few that did sell didn't last long. Parts were practically impossible to find, and by the mid-80s, most were parked, scrapped, or repowered with gas engines. The last known survivor sits today at the Rambler Ranch Museum in Colorado. On screen are pictures of it. From what I found in a forum, it's been sitting outside under a tree for at least 5 years awaiting a new restoration. We can see the features that these came standard with, like a heavy-duty suspension, a roof rack, power steering, cruise control, and on the outside we can see turbo diesel 4x4 in a cursive font. This is one of my personal favorite cars in this video, one of my probably top 10 cars of all time. I love the Eagle, and what a fascinating part of AMC's history. I think most of us are familiar with the infamous Oldsmobile diesel engines, but there was one specific variation only produced in 1985. It being the LS2. No, not that LS2. It's the Oldsmobile V6 that was available in the Electra, DeVille, Fleetwood in '98. General Motors was fighting an uphill battle to save its reputation with diesel engines. The company's earlier 5.7 Oldsmobile diesels had already become notorious for reliability issues, and public trust was gone. Still, and you gotta give it to GM, they gave it one last shot with the LS2, a heavily revised version built only for the 1985 model year. Under the hood was the same 4.3 liter displacement as before, but nearly everything inside had been strengthened. GM added sturdier head bolts, improved gaskets, a redesigned fuel injection system, and a new rotary pump to make the engine quieter and cleaner. Power came in at about 85 horsepower and 165 pound-feet of torque paired to a 4-speed automatic. It certainly wasn't quick, but fuel economy hovered around 28 to 30 miles per gallon highway, which was impressive for a full-size car in 1985. Unfortunately, by that time, the damage was already done. American buyers associated GM diesels with smoke, poor starts, and expensive repairs. After 1985, GM quietly discontinued the LS2, ending its brief and turbulent experiment with diesel passenger cars. Around the same time you could get the LS2, you could get your Tempo or Topaz with a naturally aspirated Mazda RF 2-liter diesel. And the only transmission paired with the engine was a 5-speed manual. They made a whopping 53 horsepower and 82 pound-feet of torque, but you got absolutely great fuel economy. The regular 2.3 gas got a combined of around 23 miles per gallon, whereas these got around 46 miles per gallon. That's a 100% increase in better fuel economy. They got 41 miles per gallon city and 56 miles per gallon highway. That's incredible, even by modern standards. They were offered from 1984 to 1986 only. The first gen stretched until 87, so I'm assuming sales were not good enough to go on for another year. It looks like any trim could opt in for the diesel, whether it's the L, GLX, or GL, at least on the Tempo. Nothing crazy, forgotten about, maybe, unless you've owned one. I think a more interesting entry could have been the Continental with that BMW diesel, but I feel like those are more well known, but then again, I could be wrong. In 2005, Daimler Chrysler decided to test the North American market's appetite for diesel engines by introducing a new powertrain in the Jeep Liberty. The last time Jeep had offered a diesel here was back in 1987 with the Cherokee and Comanche with those Renault engines. They were only available for the 2005 and 2006 model years and sold in sport and limited trims with a 5-speed automatic. The Liberty CRD or Common Rail Diesel used a 2.8-liter VM motorized turbo diesel rated at 160 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. Funny enough, that's the same Italian company that was sourced for the AMC Eagle diesel. They got around 60 more pound-feet of torque than that 3.7 V6 and about 20% better fuel economy, officially rated at 20 miles per gallon city and 26 highway.
There we go.
It wasn't fast. 0 to 60 took about 9.5 seconds, but it could tow up to 5,000 pounds and cover roughly 350 miles on a tank, impressive for a small SUV in 2005. Unfortunately, emissions regulations were the Liberty CRD's downfall. It couldn't be sold in California, New York, and several northeastern states, and when stricter federal standards arrived in 2007, the model was dropped entirely. Over its short production life, around 11,000 units were sold, and in terms of reliability, not the greatest, but if maintained properly, also not the worst. After the short-lived Liberty CRD, Jeep decided to go bigger. The second chapter in Jeep's diesel experiment came in 2007 with the Grand Cherokee CRD, powered not by VM motorized this time, but Mercedes-Benz. Under the hood was a 3-liter dual overhead cam turbo diesel V6, the same engine used in the E-Class and ML models of that era. It produced 215 horsepower and a massive 376 pound-feet of torque. That meant the diesel Grand Cherokee could tow 7,200 pounds, which is equal to the V8, while using far less fuel. The EPA rated it at 18 city and 23 highway, though real-world averages hovered around 20 miles per gallon, roughly a 30% improvement over the gas version. On pavement, it was nearly as quick as the Hemi, hitting 0 to 60 in 8 seconds, and reviewers noted how surprisingly quiet and refined it was for a diesel. However, there were, of course, a few trade-offs. The diesel option cost nearly $1,700 extra, added weight, and was only 45 state legal due to strict emission standards in California and parts of the Northeast. It was discontinued after 2008 as Chrysler prepared to phase in cleaner diesel technology, which I believe were those eco-diesel engines. Only around 12,000 units were sold in North America, making it another short-lived but fascinating Jeep diesel experiment. As for reliability, the 3-liter Mercedes diesel itself was solid, but the emissions hardware around it wasn't. Problems like clogged EGR valves, oil leaks, and DPF issues were common, and repairs weren't cheap. When maintained properly, it could last over 200,000 miles, but most owners did not make it that far. Sounds like the same common issues that I experienced with my Jetta TDI, literally all emissions related. By 2012, Mercedes decided it was time to bring diesel back to the S-Class, something it hadn't done in nearly 2 decades. Of course, across seas, this was not the case. The S-Class had diesel offerings ever since. The result was the S350 BlueTEC, a car that proved you could still have all the luxury of a flagship sedan, just with better fuel economy. Under the hood was Mercedes 3-liter turbo diesel V6, familiar from the ML and E-Class, but tuned here for 240 horsepower and 455 pound-feet of torque. Power went to all 4 wheels through a 7-speed automatic, and despite being the slowest S-Class in the lineup, it still hit 0 to 60 in 7 seconds flat. The EPA rated it at 20 miles per gallon city and 31 highway, numbers that made it one of the most efficient full-size luxury cars in the world at the time. Real-world testing showed about 26 miles per gallon combined and a cruising range over 600 miles per tank, nearly double what the S550 managed. Beyond the numbers, it was everything you expect from an S-Class, quiet, refined, and overbuilt. On the road, the BlueTEC didn't beg to be driven fast, it just delivered a wave of torque that made effortless highway passing feel like cheating. Reliability was solid overall, but the diesel's complex emission system could cause expensive repairs once the warranty ended. Again, the Achilles heel of these cars, the overcomplicated emission control systems that break all the time and cost a small fortune. Other than that, this car still looks modern while being over 10 years old. You have all the features you could ever ask for, and they are super rare, being sold here for only 2 years. After decades without a diesel compact because, well, they scared them, Chevy decided to jump back into the game with the 2014 Cruze. The first diesel GM passenger car sold in the US in 28 years. Under the hood was a 2-liter turbo diesel 4-cylinder, good for 151 horsepower and 264 pound-feet of torque, paired exclusively with a 6-speed automatic. Fuel economy was, of course, the main selling point, 27 city and 46 miles per gallon highway. With a light foot, some drivers even squeezed out 800 miles on a tank, and post-edit, I'm going to have to make sure that is true because that seems like insane. It looked almost identical to a regular Cruze, but the driving experience was very different. Tons of low-end torque made it feel faster off the line than the numbers suggested. The only real giveaway was the old-school diesel clatter, especially at idle, but I think that's what makes these cars unique. despite strong mileage and comfort, sales were tiny. Only about 2% of Cruze buyers opted for the diesel. It was dropped after 2015 as the first gen wound down. Then a few years later came diesel round 2. For 2017 to 2019, the second generation Cruze diesel arrived with a new 1.6 liter Whisper diesel. These made 137 horsepower and 240 pound-feet of torque, which is less than the first generation, but these came with a 6-speed manual. Efficiency improved even further, 52 miles per gallon highway with the manual, making it one of GM's most fuel-efficient vehicles ever. That title probably goes to the Geo Metro. That would be my guess. A hatchback model joined in 2018, but manual transmission availability vanished after that year. Despite excellent range and efficiency though, American demand for diesel sedans faded fast. Mainly because of Dieselgate, and I'll just throw this in here now, but the 2018 BMW 540d I believe was the final diesel luxury sedan offered in the US. That car had a shelf life of just 7 months. 7 months was the only time you could have bought this monster when new. And again, the main reason for this was because of Dieselgate. Interestingly, a few years after Dieselgate scared most luxury brands away, Jaguar did the opposite and brought a diesel to its first SUV. The F-Pace 20D used a 2-liter Ingenium, I probably pronounced that wrong, turbo diesel rated at 180 horsepower and 318 pound-feet of torque. They were mated into an 8-speed automatic and came standard with all-wheel drive. It wasn't the fastest F-Pace 0 to 60 in around 9 seconds, but the pitch was simple: big torque, long range, real-world efficiency. EPA ratings landed around 20 miles per gallon combined, so 26 city, 33 highway, with close to 600 miles of highway range. The 8-speed keeps it in the fat part of the torque curve, so day to day it feels responsive even if wide open throttle runs are underwhelming. Crucially, it still handled like an F-Pace: quick steering, tidy body control, and strong brakes, just with a quieter, low RPM demeanor and a faint diesel tick at idle. Early Ingenium 2-liter diesels had timing chain complaints and the usual EGR DPF maintenance sensitivities. It's a Jaguar. I would not touch one of these with a 10-foot pole. From 2018 to 2020, the Equinox, or Equinox, however you want to say it, and the Terrain offered that same 1.6 turbo diesel found in the Cruze. 137 horsepower and 240 pound-feet of torque, nothing crazy, but 28 miles per gallon city and 38 miles per gallon highway. It's crazy because I personally never knew these even existed. I've never seen either with that badge, so it does tell me that sales were probably not the best. I don't really have much more to say about these. I wonder if those 1.6s are reliable, because maybe it is a decent pickup at a reasonable price. After years of its coming, Mazda finally brought its 2-liter Skyactiv-D diesel to the US in 2019, but only in the top signature trim with all-wheel drive. On paper, it's classic diesel, 168 horsepower, 290 pound-feet of torque, a relaxed 6-speed auto, and long-legged cruising. There's some turbo lag off the line, but once you're rolling, it leans on that low RPM torque and settles into a quiet, effortless highway cruiser. Owners saw high 20s to low 30s in mixed driving and 32 miles per gallon on steady highway runs. A huge pro with the diesel is it bumped the towing rating to 3,500 pounds versus 2,000 for gas models. So after all this build-up, Mazda finally brings over their diesel engine. Why was it so short-lived? Well, the Skyactiv-D carried roughly a $4,000 premium over an equivalent gas signature, yet the EPA rating didn't crush the gas 2.5's numbers the way shoppers expected. Those 2.5 turbos have great power, offer enough torque, they have decent fuel economy. Yes, lower towing rating, but have any of us seen anyone towing with a Mazda CX-5? I don't think so. Mazda sold the diesel here for essentially one model year and then pulled it after 2020 due to low demand. 5 years later, I think these are a decent option. They definitely don't sell for nearly as much as they stickered for. Again, signature trim, so these are loaded. They are pretty rare, and it's another model I feel like most of us have never heard of. And there you have it, 10 forgotten diesel cars offered in the States over the years. I love diesel cars. I have a JSW TDI with a 6-speed. It's a torque monster, and I plan on putting a tune and delete on it sometime in the future. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, which I'm sure I did, and maybe I'll be able to make a part 2 if I get enough suggestions. I do want to say last week's video was bold on my end. I never intended to get political in any way. I thought it was very neutral when talking. At the end of the day, I just want to talk about cars, that's it. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the rest of your week. Happy Halloween if you're watching this, Wednesday, Thursday, and I will see you all next week.